Okay, when we left off last, we were talking about specialization, okay? Because to be a true multicellular organism, you have to have specialization. That means you have to have cells whose structures are slightly different from each other so that they can do a specific job, okay? That doesn't mean that every cell in the body can't do every job, okay? They usually still can, but they're gonna be better at one of them than the others, okay? So in specialization, okay, you have someone who is an expert at this job, doing this job, rather than having cells that are a jack of all trades and a master of none, all right? That sort of makes sense? Okay? It's better to have someone who's an expert at a job doing that job than someone who's like mediocre at all jobs. Okay? Because they'll get the job done, but they won't do as good a job as someone who's an expert. Okay? So having specialization means you got experts all throughout your body that do a specific job that they are very good at. All right? So we were looking at the layers of the leaf as an example of specialization or specialized cells in the plant, which will be our exemplar of a multicellular organism. Okay, so we have the palisade layer. Okay, the palisade layer carries out photosynthesis. Okay, that is its job. The upper epidermis, that secretes the cuticle. That waxy cuticle, okay, the thing that seals in all the water. Okay, so the cells that make up the upper epidermis, they don't have a lot of stuff in them because they need to be mostly transparent so that light goes through them and hits the palisade cells so that they can carry out photosynthesis, right? So those cells that are in the upper epidermis and the lower epidermis for that matter, okay, don't have a lot of chloroplasts, okay? They would have very large water vacuoles, okay, making most of the cell, transparent. Okay, palisade layer, obviously those are packed right in, okay, so if you can imagine kind of what a package of hot dogs looks like, you know how they're like packed right together and it almost flattens the sides of them, okay, that's what the palisade layer looks like, okay, it looks like a package of hot dogs and they're all just jammed right in there, okay, really, really close to each other, right, and they're carrying out tons and tons of photosynthesis. Underneath that is the spongy layer, okay, and the spongy layer is responsible for gas exchange. Okay, that's carbon dioxide, water, okay, or water vapor, okay, and oxygen, right? Those gases pass through that layer easily because of all the gaps in between the cells. Spread throughout the leaf are veins. Okay? You've probably seen those anytime you look at a leaf, there's little veins that run through it. Okay? Those veins have two separate sets of tubes in them. Right? Those tubes are the xylem, which carries water, and the phloem, which carries sugar. Better the other way. Okay, so the xylem carries water from the roots to the leaves, so up, and the phloem carries sugar down. Okay, so what you're looking at here on the left, okay, is an electron microscope picture of the layers of the leaf, right? So right here, this is the palisade layer, right? So you can see all the cells tightly packed in. Okay. this thing right here, that's a vein. Okay? The inside of the vein is the xylem, and the outside of the vein is the flow. Okay? And then you can see underneath that there's big gaps in this tissue that's surrounding that. That is the spongy layer. Okay? So you can see there's lots of gaps. There's still cells there, but there's gaps, okay, like a sponge. And then, I don't know if they got a good shot. Okay? Down here you can see the lower epidermis. Okay? That would be this stuff right here. Okay? Pretty thin layer, but it's thick. Everyone with me so far? Really can't make up our mind what we want to do with those today. Okay, so the next thing we need to talk about, okay, because we're talking about specialization here. These are examples of specialized cells. But now we need to talk about some cells that are really, really specialized. Okay, like the most specialized ones in the leaf. Okay, and those have to do with stomata. Okay, or stomates. A stomate, I told you the other day, is like a pore. It can open and close to regulate the amount of water that is allowed to be lost by evaporation. Plants have to lose water by evaporation in order to carry out photosynthesis, so it's a process that has to happen. But obviously you don't want water just willy-nilly evaporating from everywhere. Okay? So the plant has these little holes that can open and close. Now, they don't open and close on command. Remember, a plant doesn't have a brain, doesn't have nerves, it's not sending signals that says, open the stomates, close the stomates. Okay, it doesn't work that way, okay, like it would, for an animal. Okay, plants just don't do that. So, these stomates are specialized to change their shape in response to osmosis. Okay, I'm going to explain how that works here in just a second. All right, so this is a colorized electron micrograph of what a stomate looks like. That one is closed, that one is open. Okay, and they are surrounded by guard cells. Right? The guard cells are the ones that are specialized to open and close in response to the amount of water that's available. Okay, so in the morning, when the plant has lots of water, it's been all night, the roots have been catching up and bringing water into the plant. Okay, bringing water into the plant. What happens is the water vacuoles in the guard cells get really full. And so does all the tissue surrounding the guard cell. Tons and tons of water in there. Okay, and when those vacuoles get full, they put so much pressure on the cell wall that the guard cell kind of assumes a bean shape, like you can see here. Okay, so it assumes this shape that looks like a bean. Okay, that's what happens when there's lots and lots of water available. Now, throughout the day, as the sun shines on the leaf and the leaf carries out photosynthesis, water evaporates through the stomate. But as that water evaporates, the minerals that are in it get left behind. Okay, like if you accidentally left a pot of water on the stove boiling and it all boiled off, there's salts, minerals left behind on the pan. Okay, the same is true in a plant. When water evaporates from the plant, okay, the salts get left behind. And so what starts to happen, okay, you can see here all these little red and blue dots that represent salt. Okay, the concentration of salt increases in the cells surrounding the stomate. Okay, now when we talked about osmosis, we said osmosis is the passive movement of water towards salt, or to try and balance salt concentration. So throughout the day, the concentration of salt outside the guard cells gets higher, and water naturally moves out of the guard cells and into the cells surrounding them. That means that the cells can't hold that shape anymore. Okay? They don't have all that extra pressure inside that will keep that bean shape, and they become flatter. And when they become flatter, they're like the second picture there that says shrunken. Okay? and that's the closed position of the stomate. It just naturally happens as the plant loses water. Okay, so it's an excellent example of specialization in a cell to help, in this case, to help regulate water loss. Okay, but it's a cell that changes its shape in natural response to the losing of water. Okay, so what's on that slide there and that diagram is super, super important. I guarantee I will ask a question about how a plant regulates its water loss. You would want to talk about stomates, guard cells, osmosis, evaporation of water, changing of the shape of the guard cells. All of that is how a plant regulates its water. So I would suggest, if you don't have the notes package, that you copy everything on that slide right now. Okay? I'll give you a minute. Okay, so from this lesson, you'll be asked to do two things on the test. Okay? Talk about how a plant regulates water. I would say this would be a big, big part of that, how a stomate works. But also, that the leaf is covered in what? Wax. The waxy cuticle. Yeah, same thing that's on your fingernail. Okay? Cuticle. Okay? Waxy cuticle, it's the outer layer. Okay? So I definitely know those things because that's how a plant regulates water loss. Second thing you're going to be asked, talk about the layers of the leaf as an example of multicellularity and specialization. Being able to tell me, this is the palisade layer, here's what it does. The cells are all packed in, they have lots of chloroplasts. This layer is pretty transparent, and all it does is secrete the waxy cuticle. Okay, talk about what each layer does and how that's an example of it being specialized or doing something different from the other cells. Okay, those would be the two things you have to do from this lesson. Okay, we'll just talk about these real quick here. So why was multicellularity so superior to unicellularity? Like, as soon as it appeared, it just exploded. Okay, and suddenly there were tons and tons and tons of organisms that were multicellular. Okay, what was the big advantage? Think back to the little cube lab that we did.
Isn't it that they can grow bigger by having many cells if you do like diffusion?
Yes, okay, it overcomes that surface area to volume problem faced that makes diffusion not work for a large single-celled organism. Multicellular organisms can get big because their individual cells are small and can still use diffusion to transport the material. Okay, everybody with me there? If you're bigger, that's generally better. I mean, there have been times in the Earth's history where being smaller was better, but generally speaking, being bigger is better. You have more options, okay, for getting energy, okay, and fewer things can eat you. Right? Okay, how are cells in the leaf different from cells found in the stem of a plant? Okay, what's the job of the leaf?
Take out oxygen.
Well, it's gonna give off oxygen, okay, because it's carrying out photosynthesis. Job of the leaf is to carry out photosynthesis. So it has a big bladed shape, okay, big surface area, faces up where the sun generally is, okay. Its job is to make food for the plant. The stem, on the other hand, its job is to support the leaves and transport materials, water up and sugar down. Is its structure a lot different because of that? Yeah, a stem is more about support. So it's got to have strong cell walls, lots of water vacuoles, things that make it able to support weight. Whereas the leaf just needs to have a big surface area and lots of cells to carry out photosynthesis. Okay? Their cells look different because they have different jobs. All right, epidermis and stomates. We just talked about that. They have similar jobs. The epidermis secretes the waxy cuticle that seals the leaf and doesn't allow water to evaporate. The stomates open and close to regulate the amount of evaporation that occurs. Okay, and then we just talked about the stomate, so that is osmosis will draw water out of the guard cells, causing them to close as water evaporates from the plant, and that will limit the amount of water it loses to evaporation. Okay, so the shape of the guard cells changes because of osmosis and in response to the amount of salt that is around. Okay? All right. Give you guys about a three or 4 minute break here. Get up, walk around a little bit before we talk about the next thing. All right, so what we're going to go over here, guys, today, and I don't know if we'll finish it or not, but we'll at least get it started, is how multicellular organisms, in this case a plant, okay, transports material. Right? And what we're going to look at is how it uses the same principles that a cell uses, but on a bigger scale. Okay, that's what we're looking at, is that a plant uses the same forces, okay, or the same processes to move water and sugar that an individual cell uses to move materials as well. Okay, so we're going to look at that. We're going to look at the structures that they travel in, okay, look at the basic structure of a vascular plant, okay, and again, the forces involved in the transport. Okay, so the biggest challenge that a terrestrial plant, that's one that lives on land, faces is this. The resources it needs are not in the same place. Okay? Water and nutrients are in the ground. Light is not. Okay? So a plant has structures that go underground where there's no light. What can those structures not do? There's no light, they can't carry out photosynthesis. Okay, so that would be the roots. Okay, the roots are incapable of making their own energy because they're in the dark. Okay, now leaves, on the other hand, are really good at making photosynthesis because they're up in the air, there's lots of light there. Okay, but here's their problem. They're covered in a waxy cuticle that makes it impossible for them to absorb any water or nutrients. Okay, so these two parts of the plant have to have like a highway between them that brings materials back and forth. Okay, so it's very much like Highway 2. You got stuff that's going northbound and you got stuff that's going southbound, or in a plant, up and down. Okay, the stuff that's made in, let's say, Edmonton comes to Calgary, and the stuff that's made in Calgary goes to Edmonton, and they don't go in the same lanes, because that would obviously not work out very well. Okay, you cannot transport the same, you can't transport materials in two different directions in the same tube. Okay, that would be like two C trains on the same track going opposite directions. That's the whole reason there's two tracks. Okay, we don't want that to happen. So there's a set of tubes that carry water and nutrients from the roots to the leaves, and there's a set of tubes that carry sugar from the leaves to the roots. Okay, now plants have come up with all sorts of adaptations for transporting material, conserving water, or accessing it for that matter, okay, and storing excess energy. Okay, these are but a few examples of that. All right, so if we look at strawberries, okay, anybody grow strawberries in their yard? Okay, how about raspberries? We got raspberry patch. Okay, you ever notice anything about the raspberries? They spread, yeah, they're crazy. And it's not because like birds are dropping the fruit other places and the seeds are growing. These things just crawl. Okay, if you have raspberries somewhere, you're going to have them everywhere. Okay, because they put out these little stolons. Okay, it's like a pipeline that goes from location A to location B. So when the initial plant starts to exhaust the water and nutrients where its roots are, it makes a pipeline to another place. That's what the stolon is. It's like a root, okay? And it just goes to another spot, and if it finds a spot that's got water and nutrients, it'll start growing roots there, okay? Some of the water and nutrients will go back through the pipeline to the original plant, and another plant that is genetically identical to the first one will start to grow there, okay? Strawberries do the same thing, and they'll be connected by this stolon. All right, so that's one way that some plants have adapted to what happens when I exhaust the resources that are here. How do I get them from somewhere else? Okay, cassava and potatoes, sweet potatoes do the same thing, turnips do the same thing. Okay, they store excess energy in their roots. okay, in what's called either a rhizome, okay, so that's what you see there on a cassava plant. Hops do it as well, okay, and obviously potatoes, turnips, and sweet potatoes make tubers, that is swollen nodules on the roots that are made of mostly starch, okay. So for those types of plants, the reason they do that is they are going to face some sort of seasonal challenge, be it drought or cold, where they will not be able to survive. So they'll shut down and go dormant. Okay? And then when the conditions get better, there's a whole bunch of energy stored in their roots, in either the rhizome or the tuber, okay, that they can use to get started again. Okay? This is why Mark Watney in The Martian was able to grow potatoes from the potatoes that they sent there for their Thanksgiving dinner. Okay? If you haven't seen that movie, that's what happens. Read the book first if you haven't. Okay? The book is awesome. Has anyone seen the Project Hail Mary movie yet? It's a maze, right? If you haven't seen the movie, you won't get that, but okay, it's really good. So is the book. Okay, sorry, got off track there for a second. Okay, back to the tuber thing. Okay, so there's so much energy stored in a potato, okay, that it's enough to get a plant started. In fact, it's way more than enough to get a plant started. Anyone ever see what happens to a potato if you leave it in the pantry too long? You forget about it? It starts to grow, yeah. Okay, and it can grow a lot. I once forgot about some in my basement, okay, for like 6 months. And then I went down there and I thought there was like a giant spider in my basement with long purple legs. Except the long purple legs had purple little leaves growing off of them. Okay? And I kid you not, they were like 6 feet long. Okay? What this potato had done was it had started growing. I don't know if it had got a little bit of light on it or what that had signaled it to grow. Okay? But it started growing like along the floor and towards a basement window. Okay, didn't make it because it ran out of the energy stored in the potato because it had become this slimy black grossness. Okay, but there was all these long, like adventitious type of roots that had come out from it that were looking to get into the light where they could carry out photosynthesis. Okay, that's exactly what a potato does in nature. It just starts to push that little root out of the potato and towards the surface. And once it gets out, just like in The Martian, the little leaves will come out, they'll start carrying out photosynthesis, and then it won't need the energy in the potato to grow anymore. But that's how you can plant potatoes in your own yard. Okay? If you don't have a garden, you can get like bags that you can put dirt in and you can grow them in the bags. Okay? You cut a potato in half, and as long as there's an eye on that potato, it'll grow. Okay, pretty simple process. Okay, and anything that makes a rhizome, same thing. A piece of that rhizome is going to provide the energy to get that plant started after some sort of stress, winter, drought, whatever it happens to be. Okay, and another way to store energy is in kind of the base of the stem. This is what you would see onions do in particular. Okay, so the swollen kind of base of the onion that we eat, okay, and we use for flavor in food. The reason it's so sweet is because that's where the sugar that the plant has made is being stored, right? It will use that, okay? You plant onions the same way you plant potatoes. You can either plant them by a seed, or you can take a dried bulb from the previous year, put it in the ground, and it'll grow. Okay? There's enough energy stored in there, okay, for them to get started again, right? But it involves obviously storing energy from the previous season. Okay? So just adaptations that plants have come up with, okay, for surviving, times that are going to be difficult. Okay, so questions on some of those survival tactics? Okay. So the big thing we have to understand here is that plants are broken up into effectively 3 parts: the leaves, the stem, and the roots. Okay, and they all have different jobs. The stem gets materials up and down. The leaves carry out photosynthesis. The roots get all the water and minerals from the soil. All right. Now, got to talk about this material. Okay? Lignin. Okay? Lignin is a material that not all plants can make, okay, but some do. And it allows them to harden the stem and make it stronger. this is really good if you're a plant that is competing for sunlight with other plants. It allows you to get really, really tall. Okay? Lignin is what allows a plant to make wood, okay? To make a solid trunk that's going to support foliage, maybe even hundreds of meters above the ground. Okay? The plants that I have in this room, they don't make any lignin. Right? I mean, look how tall they are. These are mature plants. They're not getting any taller. Okay? And in fact, that one just grows downward. Right? They don't have the ability to make lignin and make a really strong stem that would allow them to support their leaves if they were taller. Okay? Obviously, trees can do this. Okay? Now, here's how lignin works. Lignin is like mortar, okay, or cement. So if you make a cinder block wall, like this one back here, okay, you don't just lay the bricks on top of each other and walk away. Okay? It won't be very strong, right? You just lean on that and it would fall over because the bricks wouldn't be connected by anything. So if you ever looked at a cinder block or a brick, they have holes in them, right? A cinder block has two big holes in it. What goes in the holes? Cement, okay, or mortar. Okay? If you're doing bricks, okay, what you do is you lay the bricks and you put the mortar on top and you kind of squish the next brick on, and it squishes the mortar, the cement, into the holes of both the brick below and the brick above. And when that hardens, it's no longer two separate bricks. It's one full wall. Okay? Same thing is done here. The cement is poured down the holes, and then when it hardens, this isn't 100 bricks, it's one solid structure because they're all connected. Lignin does the same thing with cells. It cements the cell walls together. Right? Then we don't have to rely on like turgor pressure from the water vacuole. We just have cemented cells stuck together just like a cinder block wall. Okay? That's where wood comes from. Okay? The hard part of the trunk of a tree is because all the cells have been cemented together. Okay, so what they're showing here is kind of how this works. Okay, there's the cellulose fiber that the cell walls are made out of. Okay, and you can see that it's cemented together with the lignin, the green stuff. Okay, that stuff just kind of goes all together and connects all those cellulose fibers together so that they're really, really strong. All right, now lignin is used obviously to support a plant, but it's also used in other things. Okay, it's also the material that makes the hard shell on a nut. Okay, so if you've ever like eaten a pistachio or a peanut or anything like that, and you have to break that shell open, that shell is made of the same material that the trunk of a tree is. It's made of lignified cell walls. It's strong and it protects the seed inside. Okay, pine cones, same thing. Right? Pine cones are made of lignin, that's why they feel like wood when you have them in your hand. They are, okay? And that helps to protect the seeds inside. Okay, questions on the role of lignin? Okay, so that helps support a plant because plants have to compete for their resources. I know that sounds weird, it almost sounds like personification. I think that's the right word in English when you give traits of a living thing to it. Yeah, okay. So it's like that, okay? But they are competing, right? Other plants in the same area need the same stuff. So if you can do it better, you live and the other one dies. Nature's cruel, okay? If you're a small plant and you live amongst a bunch of really tall trees, that's probably not good for you, okay? Unless you're adapted to living in the shade, okay? And having, roots that can get moisture that the big trees can't, it's going to be pretty hard for you. Okay? Growing taller allows you to compete better for those things. Okay, now we got to talk about turgor pressure, which is another way the shape of a plant is held together. All right, so I took pictures of my plants. This is a few years ago. You can tell because it's not as big. Okay, that's that plant right there. Okay, I put it in a different pot because it grew so much. But this was what it looked like a few weeks ago, right? When I said, hey guys, I'm going to water this plant here now because it was all wilted. Okay, now it looks much healthier. All the leaves are, quite firm, facing up again, facing the sun, whereas they were kind of limp and curled. Okay, so this is what the plant looks like when the cells look like this. Okay, when the water vacuoles lose all that water, it's just like the guard cells. Okay, they can't hold their shape because they can't push against the cell wall. Okay, the cell wall can't support the shape of the plant by itself. It needs the reinforcement from the water vacuole inside. And when it can't support it, the plant just gets soft, okay, and gets wilty and curls up. Okay? So it'll look like this, all wilted. And then when you water it, as long as it's not crunchy, okay? Once it's crunchy, it's too far gone, you're not gonna save it. Okay? But if it's just like this, you water it, those water vacuoles will fill right back up, okay? Then it'll look perfectly fine again. Okay? Now, this actually happened for us a while back. I got it on time lapse completely by accident. Okay, so that video can be a life lesson for you. If you think you failed at something, you might have succeeded at something else and not even known it. Okay? I was trying to take a video of the lab and the water movement through the leaf, show the blue dye moving into it, and I failed because I set up the lighting wrong. But I got a great video of a plant recovering from being overly dry. Okay, so it still worked out. All right, so when a plant is healthy, the water vacuoles are nice and full, and they are exerting turgor pressure. Okay, that is a term you'll need to know. Okay, they are exerting turgor pressure, okay, pushing from the inside against the cell walls, holding the cells firm. Okay, as the plant loses water, salts get left behind. Okay, and the salts start to build up. And when that happens, water moves towards the salt by what process? Osmosis. Okay, and that's going to draw water out of the vacuoles. Okay, and that's going to result in the plant wilting. Okay, and doing this. All right, so on that note, a lot of people will write this on like a quiz or a test. What's the function of the water vacuole? Okay, and they'll say stores water. It doesn't store water. It's not like a bottle of water you can go to when you're thirsty. Okay? It's not storing water. The plant doesn't draw from it when it's thirsty. Okay? It supports the plant. It can lose water from it by osmosis. That's not the plant using water to save itself. That's just the water moving passively by a process the plant can't control. Okay? So the water vacuole's function is support the cell from within using turgor pressure. Okay, I will expect to see that term and for you to know that term. Okay, that could be a fill-in-the-blank item on a quiz, multiple choice item on a test, okay, term you're going to need to know. All right, so let's talk about roots. Okay, main job of the roots. Okay, anchor the plant to the soil, absorb minerals and water. Okay. There are some, obviously, modified to store food, not all, okay, but some, right? I would expect to see these functions: anchor the plant, absorb minerals, and water. That is the job of all roots. Now, roots come in different kinds. Okay, there are different types of roots. We will be most concerned with these two. Okay, tap roots and fibrous roots. Those will be the only ones I'll ask about. Okay, tap roots are single deep roots. Okay, so the plant has a single root, okay, that just goes down really deep. So a carrot is an example of a tap root. A turnip is an example of a tap root. Dandelions have a taproot. If you've ever pulled one out of your yard, they have a big long root. Canada thistle, same thing. Okay, they can have a root that's 4 to 6 feet deep. Okay, but it's a single deep root. Now, advantages of a taproot. Very often they can store food energy because they're a single thick root. Okay. Other advantage, they go very deep. If there is like an aquifer, okay, or a well or something like that near the surface, they might be able to tap it, okay? Hence the name taproot. Lots of times we'll see roots that have very deep plants that have really deep tap roots are actually connected to an aquifer. Okay, anybody have a well that they get their water from at home? Okay, so your well taps an aquifer. Okay, depending on how deep or shallow that aquifer is, okay, it could be actually being harvested by plants with tap roots in the area. Now, fibrous roots are the opposite. Fibrous roots are everywhere. Okay, you would have a mat of roots going all over the place. Generally not very deep, generally near the surface. Okay, there are some exceptions, but most of them don't go very deep. Not like a taproot because it's hard to drive thin fibers very deep. Which one would be better at anchoring a plant in, let's say, like a big windstorm? Fibrous roots. Yeah, fibrous roots are way better for anchoring a plant because you're increasing the anchor points. Okay, you've got all these little roots going out that are grabbing onto the soil and holding you in all different directions. Okay, so if the plant starts to blow, okay, and it's going back and forth, it's got support in all directions from those fibrous roots. Okay, most of the time, if a tree falls over and it has fibrous roots, which most do, it's because it either got snapped off or it actually pulled the roots, and you'll see the big root ball, okay? When it falls over, you'll see the big root ball kind of just sticking out, okay? Tap roots, okay, are actually not very good for support because they can be worked right out of the ground. If the wind is blowing and the plant rocks back and forth, so let's say ground level's right here, plant rocks back and forth, what's happening to my elbow? It's going back and forth. It'll work itself right out of the ground, okay, and get tipped over, okay, very easily. So fibrous roots generally better for anchoring in the wind, okay. Fibrous roots also generally better for surface area for absorbing water. If you have a single tap root, you've got the surface area of that tap root and whatever little white roots come off of it. Okay, you've all pulled out a carrot before, right? Like it's got little white roots coming off of it that increase the surface area a little. Okay, but fibrous roots generally have a better surface area for absorption. All right, questions on those? Okay, so tap roots, fibrous roots, okay, gotta know kind of their differences, right? For like a multiple choice question or something like that. Now, other types of roots that I'm not gonna test you on, okay, prop roots. Prop roots are the ones that you would see if you go to like Florida, to the Everglades, where the trees grow right out of the swamp and their main roots are usually submerged. They'll have prop roots. So rainforest, tropical areas typically have lots of plants with prop roots. They're like a snorkel. They stay above the water because the roots underwater would suffocate otherwise because it's just water there. Okay, so they have these prop roots that help to anchor it but also allow oxygen to be absorbed. Now, adventitious roots can actually come off of the stem, not out of the root area. These two plants both make adventitious roots. Okay, so right together. Okay, there we go. All right, so I don't know if you can see them from where you are, but there's these little brown nodules kind of all along the stem here on this plant. Okay, these are places where adventitious roots can grow. So if you've ever seen like a building that has ivy growing up the side of it, okay, ivy makes adventitious roots just like those, okay, and they can kind of drill their way into the brick, right? And they'll anchor themselves using their little adventitious roots. They're not really getting any nutrients or anything like that, but they're holding on and supporting the plant. That's how ivy can grow so tall with such skinny branches and stems. It's cheating by anchoring itself to the wall. That does the same thing. I found out the hard way. Okay, I had it on top of my cupboards in my old house, and you know, it was just growing along the cupboards. I was like, this awesome plant, looks really nice up there. And then when I moved, I went up and I grabbed the plant and I stepped off of the counter onto a chair and I pulled out a chunk of drywall because the plant had grown itself through the drywall and it looked like veins in behind the piece of drywall I pulled out. okay? It had grown these roots in behind the wall, in behind the drywall, okay? Supporting itself so it could crawl along, right? Lots of plants have the ability to do that, to climb up other things, okay? If you grow peas, or you have like a clematis or something like that that climbs up a trellis or something like that, same deal, just grows around, okay? And those are adventitious roots that hold on. Okay, questions on that? Okay, for the stems job, support the plant. Okay, so purpose of stems, support the plant and transport nutrients from the roots to the leaves. Stems are also where new growth generally comes from, okay? Like if we're looking at this plant here, okay, all the leaves come off of the stem, okay? So any point where these little nodules are can be adventitious roots or new leaves would grow them off of there, okay? So the stem is responsible for determining where new growth should happen. And lots of stimuli can trigger it to do growth in different places, okay? The reason that this happens is because, well, the most awful thing that can happen to a plant is for it to be eaten, okay? That is the fate of most plants, is that they're gonna be food for something else, right? So if something were to come along, okay, like in this picture, and chew off the top of this plant, right here, okay? Just eats all of this down to here. There are little buds that you can't really see in this picture, here and here. If this top part gets eaten, sunlight will strike down here because it's no longer shaded by the growth above, and that will trigger the plant to grow new foliage from that point, okay? This is how like a hedge is made, all right? So over at the cemetery there by the Ford dealership on Big Rock Trail, okay, that hedge that grows around there, that took a long time to grow. And what they do is they plant the plants, and then every year they prune them back. And that forces them to grow from further back, okay? And so they get thicker and thicker and thicker. If you want a plant to get thicker, okay, or you want to make like a topiary, one of those plants that's shaped like something because of the way it's pruned, you don't get to just do that and walk out and go, oh, here's a plant, I'll just prune it to look like something. You have to prune it again and again and again so it gets full and you have more to work with. So the more you cut something, or the more it gets eaten by something, the more full it will become, because it's always going to have to grow from behind the point it was trimmed or eaten, okay? If you have grass in your yard, like a lawn, the more you cut it, the thicker it will get, of course, provided you water it, okay? But the more you cut it, the thicker it will be, because it's going to grow from below. Okay, that's why golf courses always look so nice. They're always cutting it, okay, and forcing it to grow from below and getting thick. They also water and fertilize, but okay, that's why the grass there is thick. Right? They're constantly doing that, right? And why a hedge gets the way it does. Okay, kind of make sense?
Why are some stems like that one wasn't?
Just. Some plants just adapt to certain things. Like if an animal came along and ate that, it would feel weird on the tongue. So it could be a deterrent to being eaten in the same way that some plants would make an animal sick if they were eaten. Or if you brush up against poison ivy, right, you'll get all that awful rash and everything. So plants have ways to defend themselves against being eaten. Sometimes their texture, like we're having thorns like a cactus. Okay, even something small like this might be like, oh, I don't want to eat that because it feels funny. Okay, like you wouldn't eat the skin of a kiwi, probably, because it's, you know, pokey, right? It's, yeah, you feel weird. Right? Sort of make sense? Okay, layers of the leaf again. Oh man, it's like this is important because it keeps coming up. Okay, so what's the job of the leaves? Leaves are the photosynthetic organs of the plant. Most plants. A cactus also has leaves, but they're the thorns. On a cactus, the leaves have evolved out of the job of photosynthesis and into the job of leave me alone. Okay? And it's actually the rest of the body of the cactus that carries out the photosynthesis. All right, so generalized structure of a leaf would be okay, so this would be the main stem, okay? This is the petiole. This is the stalk. And this is the blade. Okay, so that's the structure of most leaves. Okay, grass doesn't have a petiole. The blade grows right out of the root. Okay, but any other types of plants, okay, you'd have a petiole. That's where the leaf connects to the stem. Then there's the stalk, and then there's the blade. Okay? The blade's where those layers of the leaf that we were talking about, those, okay, would be found. Right? You wouldn't see those layers everywhere on the plant, just on the leaf. All right, now, this is a typical leaf. It's what we call a C3 leaf. I'm never going to ask you about C4 leaves, but we'll talk about them just here for a minute. A C4 leaf is not really a leaf, okay? Cacti have that structure. If you have aloe vera, okay, or any other kind of succulent plant, okay, that's how they structure their leaves, in air quotes. Okay, those are plants that grow in typically very arid, very dry areas, so they have extra protection against water loss by changing their shape, okay, and changing where their photosynthetic organs are. Okay, like look, even the stomate here, instead of being made of 2 guard cells, is made of 4. Okay, they're very, very different, and everything in them is designed around conserving water. Okay. So it kind of structured like that. Now, you've probably heard that whole idea that if you were dying of thirst in the desert, you know, you could get water from a cactus. Okay, but people have this idea of like if I got stabby with the cactus, water would just come out of it. It's not like that at all. Okay, the way you get water from a cactus is you cut the fleshy part of the cactus out, and it's kind of has the consistency of like a cantaloupe or a honeydew. Okay, like that melon kind of texture, and you would have to suck the moisture out of the fleshy part, okay, of the tissue of the cactus. It's not like there's not a big thing of water in the middle of the cactus, or if you punch a hole in it, the water comes out. Okay, it doesn't work that way. There's water in the fleshy parts of the cactus. Okay, now, transport of plants. We're going to cover this because this is another thing that's going to be really important for how plant moves water, and then we'll quit for the day. Okay? So you have this diagram in the notes package. Okay? This diagram will be important. If you don't have the notes package printed, this is a page you're going to want to refer to, okay, in the electronic version that you can access at home. Okay? But we got to talk about how material moves within the plant. Okay? The big thing here, okay, is that osmosis is involved. Okay? Osmosis is the force that moves the water. So even a really, really tall tree, a tree that's over 100 meters tall, doesn't use any energy to transport water from its roots to its leaves. Requires no energy at all, because there's not a pump. Okay, like a plant doesn't have a heart that's pumping the water up the trunk of the tree. Okay, it just uses osmosis. Okay, so what happens is water gets absorbed by the roots. Okay, there are some minerals in that water because obviously it's pulling it out of the dirt. Okay, so it's water that's in the dirt, there's stuff in it. Okay, that water goes through the roots and into the xylem. Okay, the xylem is the part of the plant that carries the water up. The xylem, incidentally, is in the middle. Okay, so if we're looking at like what the trunk of a tree would look like, okay, so here's the trunk of the tree. The xylem is all here in the middle, and the phloem, that part that transports the sugar, that's only the very outside. So if you ever have seen a tree stump and you see the rings in it, okay, you're seeing every ring is where the phloem was that year. Because every year a new phloem grows on the outside. That's how a tree gets thicker. Okay? It adds a layer to the outside, adds a layer to the outside. Every year there's a brand new phloem. And every year there's more and more xylem to transport water. Okay? The xylem is just old phloem. Okay? Old tubes. So the xylem's on the inside, it's carrying water up. Okay? So the water gets into the xylem and moves up the tree. Now,
Is the phloem the ring in the xylem's the space in between rings?
no, the xylem's the middle of the trunk. The xylem's just the outside layer. So you know, if you like kind of notch a plant a little bit, sticky sap comes out. The sticky sap is the phloem sap. It's on the very outside. That's why deer will gnaw on a poplar in the wintertime. They're just eating frozen phloem sap. So it'd be like eating frozen maple syrup. Okay, so that's what they're doing. They're getting that stuff. It's only on the outside. The xylem's on the inside. It's only carrying water. So there's lots of xylem, but very little phloem by comparison. The phloem is just the very outside. Okay, so the water gets into the xylem. Now, what brings the water up is two things. One of them we talked about in chemistry. Okay, water is what kind of molecule? Polar. Okay, so it can exhibit hydrogen bonding, which ends up making cohesion, water sticking to itself like a barrel of monkeys. Okay, and adhesion. That would be the water sticking to the inside of the xylem. Okay, because it's not water to water, it's water to the inside of the xylem. Right? So those two processes are involved, but they can't pull. They can just keep it there. What lifts the water is osmosis. As the water evaporates, salts, the minerals that were in that water, get left behind in the leaf, specifically in the spongy layer of the leaf. Okay? Now all that salt starts to build up at the top of the plant. What does water do? If you got salt in one spot, does water move towards the salt? That's osmosis. Okay? So the water moves towards the salt by osmosis. It's osmotic pressure that actually pulls the water up the plant, which is free because osmosis is a passive process. Okay? The water just naturally wants to go towards the salt that is ending up building up in the leaf as water evaporates. Okay? And as that water moves up, it's polar, so it's hydrogen bonded to the water below it. They all move up together. Okay? Sort of makes sense? That's how water gets transported up the plant. There's an osmotic pulling force from above because salt gets left behind, okay? And the water moves towards the salt by osmosis. Okay, as the water evaporates, photosynthesis goes on. What does photosynthesis make? Food, yeah, in the form of sugar. Right? Photosynthesis makes glucose, makes sugar for the plant. All right? Now, obviously the leaves will use some of the sugar that they make, but they make more than they need. Where does it have to go? It could be stored, but what part of the plant can't make sugar for itself? The roots, because they're in the dark. So there's a pipeline, the phloem, that brings the water back, or sorry, not the water, sorry, the sugar down from the leaves to the roots. Okay, so you've got the xylem on the inside, water's moving up. Okay, you got the phloem on the outside, sugar's moving down. Do you need anything special to get the sugar to go down? What'll do that for you for free? Gravity. Yeah, so the phloem doesn't have to have any special stuff, okay, to make the sugar go, it just lets gravity bring it down. So this is the part of the tree that a maple syrup producer is going to tap into. All right, so you've all seen like the pictures of like the little taps coming out of the maple trees. They only go in about this far. Okay, that's where the sugary sap is, in the phloem, which isn't very far into the tree. You don't want to put that tap in this far. What's going to come out of it? Water, because you're going to get into the xylem and the water's just going to come pouring out. Nobody wants to put water on their pancakes, okay? Just make them soggy and gross, right? They want the sugary stuff that's in the phloem, okay? All trees have a sugary sap. Only maple trees taste yummy, okay? Other trees are sugary, sweet, but they don't have that maple kind of flavor, all right? And again, that's why deer will gnaw on the trunk of a tree in the wintertime, because there's obviously no leaves for them to eat, so they'll just chew on the bark, okay, and get into the phloem, and there's gonna be leftover frozen phloem sap in there, okay, that they can use for food. All right, making some sense? Okay, so this is, I'll actually tell you the story of where I learned this the first time. So, when I was in university, I stayed in residence, and behind our residence was this nice big open field with grass, and we would go out there and play football and baseball and whatever when we had time. It was awesome, because we just had this big field behind us. And then, in my second year, the Faculty of Forestry brought in these trees, these big, mature, adult trees from somewhere, because they were rescuing them or something, okay? And they brought them in and they planted them in this field. Well, like, and I'm talking like not small trees, like big, big, mature trees. And that really screwed things up for us, because it's really hard to play football. If, you know, you throw a long pass and you're running and you're looking at the ball and you run into a tree, okay? So we were not terribly impressed by the transplanting of these trees into our field. Luckily, one of the guys who stayed in my dorm was in forestry. His nickname was Tree Mugger. Think about it. Not tree hugger, tree mugger. He was in forestry. Anyway, he's like, hey guys, don't worry. We can take care of these trees. Like, we can't go and cut them down. Like, we'll get caught. Like, it'll be obvious. He's like, no. I got this. He goes out with this little, like, it's wire that you use to hang pictures. It's thin, but it's also quite sharp. And what he did is he went out and he put it around the tree and he held on to the ring on either end, and he just pulled it back and forth. And it acted like a little saw. Now, he wasn't cutting down the whole tree. He only ringed it. That's what he called it. He cut into the tree all the way around about that far, about an inch. What did he cut through? The thing that starts with P, the phloem. So the sap leaked out of this little slit that he had created that was like nearly invisible. You had to really look for it to see it. But the sap was leaking out of there and not getting to the roots. So the trees got real sick, okay, because their roots were essentially starving because they weren't getting the sugar they were supposed to get. So these trees are starting to get all sick, and we're like, yes, they're going to die, and we're going to get our field back. Except the forestry department outsmarted us. They came in with paper mache, okay? Paper mache is basically just newspaper, you know, with some water and stuff. And what's paper made out of? Trees, okay? They made skin grafts out of this paper mache over the cuts that we had made, okay? And it acted like a skin graft, and the tree just grew right over this paper mache skin graft, okay? And the tree survived. And for years, you could even see like the cartoons in the newspaper that they had used until the tree had kind of grown a scar over it, okay? It was the strangest thing, but it totally worked because it sealed off the phloem so that the sap wouldn't leak out and the tree survived, okay? Strange thing. So however, if there's a tree you want to get rid of, I didn't tell you this, okay, you can just ring it, and as long as there's no forestry department around to save it, it'll die, okay? All right, so this slide here is just the stuff we just talked about, all the different steps. You will need to know those, okay? The osmosis, okay, that pressure that's pulling it up, Okay, the salts being left behind, that's what creates that polar nature of water. And then the phloem just takes the sugar down because of what force? Gravity. Okay, gonna have to know that. All right, we'll leave it there.
Do you want these?